Hello, my name is Lydia and welcome to another tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how I made these collage papers using oil pastels or crayons, watercolour paint and gouache paint, or alternatively you could use acrylic paint. I've made a few videos already going through how I cut these papers and make the collage designs, but I thought I would go through how I actually make the paper. It's really simple and quite easy, and from these papers you can create a multitude of designs. Let's get started. So I have two different methods for prepping these papers, and method 2 builds on method 1, so I'm going to go through this one first. I usually start with a white crayon or oil pastel or just coloured crayons and do some mark making on the paper. Usually I do messy squiggles. Right now I'm doing straight lines. Feel free to experiment with whatever you want to do. I kind of just mess around and see what I feel like, but if I have something specific in mind that I'm trying to make a paper for example, if I'm doing tree bark, then I would probably do some straight lines using a brown oil pastel to give the effect of the tree bark. But if I don't have anything in mind, then usually I'm just messing around. And by messing around, I mean squiggles. That's my go-to default. But yeah, so these crayons and oil pastels act as a wax resist, so that when I paint watercolour paint over them, it resists the water and shows through. It's just a really easy and simple way to add texture to paper, and when you use these papers in a collage, they often don't look like much when you see them just as a piece of paper, but when you cut them out and stick them together, it can create a really nice effect. So a tip for the watercolour paintings is it's helpful if you make sure that your paint is really wet, or you can paint your whole paper beforehand just with clear water. This is so that if you're using multiple colours, then they'll bleed nicely into each other. And even if you are just using one colour, then if your paint or your paper is really wet, then when it dries, it's a nice watery watercolour effect. When I first started using watercolours, I didn't really register how much water you actually use, but once it clicked for me that I should be adding way more water than I was, then I really had a breakthrough with watercolours. So I just use this basic method of drawing on the paper with crayon or oil pastel and then going over that with paint. I usually add multiple different colours to a piece of paper, as I feel this adds a different dimension to it, but feel free to experiment with whatever colours you like. For me, I find the process of painting the water over the wax resist quite therapeutic. So I would encourage you to just kind of take a moment as you're painting, try and do it slowly and really pay attention to how the wax resists the water. And yeah, don't be too concerned with the right or wrongs, but really enjoy the process of doing this because it is fun. So while I'm doing it, I usually make quite a few different colours, different papers, different designs, so that in the future I can just use them. I don't have to start from the beginning again. So when I feel like cutting, when I feel like doing a collage, I can just use the stack of papers I've already prepared. Also, we are using some of the papers painted here for method number 2, so keep that in mind. Here is a close-up view of what these pieces look like when they're dry and ready to cut out. So method number 2 is all about adding more texture, and a lot of the time texture is added through layers, so that's why I build upon the bottom layer that we've created and just add to that. I'm using gouache paint to add the second layer, and I'm using a very bristly brush and just kind of lightly use the tip of the brush to make the strokes across the paper, and you can see it really adds a bristly texture. You can use different textured brushes and play around and figure out what you like and what you're going for. I usually also use a few different colours, one probably a bit lighter to add as a bit of a highlight, and one a bit darker. To have these two contrasting colours, light and dark, it just adds to the texture and makes it stand out more. So I keep building upon the foundation of the watercolour and crayon and just play around with different strokes. I'm usually quite free with it. I don't really have a plan of what my strokes are going to be like. I just kind of go for it. I try to make sure the brush is quite dry. Here I've added maybe a bit too much water, and that takes away the bristles a bit, but it can also add to the piece, so don't be afraid of using water. You can also play around with how much and how little you want to add on the top. Sometimes I only add a few brush strokes so you can mostly see what's underneath, but there's a few strokes of texture, and sometimes I mostly completely cover what was underneath. So yeah, it's up to you. And I would really encourage playing around and maybe looking outside and seeing different textures you see in nature, like different textures on wood, on grass, on plants, on flowers, in the sky, and try and replicate that in this process. Once these are dry, then you're ready to start using them in a collage. Here's a close-up look so you can see the texture that's in these pieces. So now you're ready to start using these papers in a collage. I have a couple of process videos out going through how I made some of my different collages, but I'm sure there's loads of videos you can find on YouTube, and I find it really inspiring to look at different collage artists. I have quite a few that I like, so I'll link my favourites in the description below. You can check them out as well. So I have another method of collaging that I haven't shared with you guys yet, but I thought might as well share all my secrets. So for this method, I scan the collage papers that I've made and then upload them onto Photoshop. Then I use the lasso tool, kind of like pretend scissors, and cut the shapes that I'm looking for, and then I can kind of move them around and do whatever I want. Another thing that's good about doing it in Photoshop is that I can use the same papers endless amount of times, so I don't have to keep making new papers. I can just use the ones that I've already made, and I can adjust the colours and the lightings a bit on Photoshop. It definitely doesn't have the same feel to handmade and hand cut pieces, but it is easier, it is quicker, and it does look nice. Here are some of the designs that I've made using these papers, and the possibilities are just endless. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, then hit the subscribe button. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, leave them down below and I'd love to get back to you. I'd love to hear from you. And that's it for this week. I'll see you next week. Bye!